So when you think of the notion of liberalism, what do you have in mind?
So to me, it is the rationalistic philosophy that emerged from England at the beginning of the Enlightenment, that has its roots in, I would say, Thomas Hobbes, through to Locke, has its most aggressive expression in the American Republic and most successful expression before being adopted by the French and imposed on the continent by the French Revolution, which takes it to an extreme that I think it has trouble escaping, and we can talk about that, why that is. And in the intervening years from, say, Napoleon to now, there's been a sort of long poisoning of our civilization due to extreme interpretations of liberalism that the moderate interpretations have real trouble resisting, because essentially they have to frame themselves as hypocrites in order to try and stem the flow of liberalism. And one of the reasons we're so vulnerable to liberalism as well is because, as Oakeshott would have said, it's the distillation of English political tradition into a doctrine. And so it's very difficult for the people whose tradition it is that has been distilled to resist it on its own grounds, because actually it's saying, no, these things that you agree with are correct. We're going to take them to the nth degree. And the problem with that is that there are loads of other considerations to, say, individual rights or personal liberty or sovereignty or whatever it is, or, autonomy, all of these concepts, that they existed in English political philosophy for centuries, long before liberalism, and the rights of Englishmen, which is what the rights of man are based on. But there is also a kind of aesthetic layer, a moral layer that attaches to these. And when you distill the doctrine away from that, you lose all of the other thick attachments that made it particular and parochial, which is what prevented it from destroying the country it came from.
Okay. I see. I think that when I am going to be defending liberalism, I'm not going to be defending liberalism in all its forms.
Sure.
So I think it is very important to discern between a more Platonist and a more Aristotelian approach to terms. I think that the Platonist approach is a bit difficult and it doesn't give us good results. The Aristotelian one is a bit better. Now, let me be a bit clear about what that is. You constantly see Plato in the early dialogues asking what is virtue, what is courage, what is temperance, as if it's supposed to be one thing and one thing only. That's the form. Aristotle says, don't look at it that way. There are kinds of things. So when you take the notion of freedom, for instance, there are kinds of freedom. I think that's the approach I'm taking.
And that's a very, very clever way of defending liberalism. But the problem I think you have is that there's a philosopher called Claire Chambers who examined what she distinguished between two kinds of liberalism. She said that there's political liberalism and there's comprehensive liberalism. And so political liberalism deals with the individual's relationship with the state. So it's a political doctrine couched in legal terms about a set of enunciated rights and limitations of the state, and that I could commit to, right? Because obviously, why wouldn't you? That's what we'd call classical liberalism. But on the transverse of that, you have what she calls comprehensive liberalism, which is taking those same values and applying them to every aspect of life. And so she essentially nails the liberal as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to do a stream on this at some point, talking through her position in detail. But to summarize, she's essentially charging the political liberal with hypocrisy, because the political liberal will claim to be a liberal and yet be in defense of illiberal ways of life. For example, a nunnery or something where women's rights and personal liberties don't exist. And the political liberal will say, no, that's fine for that to exist because that's not to do with the state. And the comprehensive liberal says, but it is illiberal. And the political liberal has to kind of go, well, yeah, but I just think we should stop here for some reason.
I think we should draw a distinction between versions of political liberalism or kinds of political liberalism. That's how I'm going to be not dodging the question. I think I am doing something, but I'm sure that you may see this as dodging the question.
No. I'm not going to say you're dodging the question, but I do feel the comprehensive liberal will be able to pin you on no matter what kind of liberalism you have. Because essentially, because it's not comprehensive, they're going to say, well, you're permitting illiberalism. Why? You're not really
I don't
a
think
liberal.
that the idea in political liberalism, not the Rawlsian view, which is ever since the early 90s understood as political liberalism, or that's what most people think
Yeah.
and associate with it. But with the tradition, as you say, yes, I do agree that there is a sort of political liberalism that I have in mind. I think that basically this is a Rousseauian thing to say to a classical liberal.
It totally is.
And it is the Rousseauian who charges the political liberal with hypocrisy,
Yes.
because the political liberal does not equate law with morality. So you could say that according to a classical liberal perspective, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance and the acceptance that some people are not going to live the way you like them to.
The problem, I think, there, though, is that the charge of hypocrisy hasn't been refuted. And so the Rousseauian liberal can essentially claim to be the real and true liberal and say you're not really a liberal, you're just pretending to be a liberal. And so any undecided, casual thinkers on the subject will have to come to the conclusion that they're correct, actually.
I think that this does not have to be the case, because that would be conceding too much ground to the Rousseauian. So for me, I do think we should definitely talk about Rousseau.
Sorry,
and the social
I'll
contract.
let you get on with
No, but just to say something in advance, that I think that when Rousseau comes and puts his philosophy forth and Rousseauians try to defend their philosophy, the proper way to respond to them, I think, is not to give them the term liberty, to question on them.
But the thing is, in a sense, they are promoting the most radical form of liberty, which is total atomization and the breaking of all bonds from all individuals in a society. So, I mean, I don't have to agree with it. Obviously, I think that's a terrible idea, but in the context and the frame that they're operating within, they have, again, just upped the ante, and so they make the other liberals seem as if they don't care, or they're not capable, or they're stupid, or they're sluggish, or they're just generally not being sincere in what they're advocating.
I understand this, but I think that I could answer to this objection by the philosopher you mentioned by saying that, yes, of course, because the classical liberal, or from the perspective of a classical liberal, there may be law and morality may be sometimes different. And we should be very much skeptical of those who pose as moral authorities about the good. And it's not so much the idea that we need to embrace just one view of the good life, but the idea that we should be skeptical of authority with respect to moral, and we should give freedom to people in order to pursue their idea of the good life themselves, provided that they respect some rights of liberty for everyone else.
See, now this is where I think that the classical liberal has the disadvantage over the Rousseauian liberal, because the classical liberal has an entirely negative doctrine, and so he can't actually lean on his doctrine and say, this will provide the good life, right? He's actually outsourced that to other conceptions of life. Whereas the Rousseauian liberal is advancing a positive doctrine that says, no, this will be the good life. To have no connections, to be a mere consumer, to be someone who is free to follow whatever whim fate puts in your mind at that time. That is the good life. And so, again, you've got this position where the classical liberal doctrine has a profound weakness within it and actually relies on something else. And so the Rousseauian liberal can say, look, you're not really a liberal, right, actually. You're actually this other thing. You're really a conservative, which is kind of true.
I think that there may be a way of answering this, because I do accept that there is a weakness there with respect to action guidance. I agree with you there. There are things that if we try to create a sort of liberal morality, I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah.
And I agree with you there 100%. But I think that there is no charge of hypocrisy there, because hypocrisy would be if the political liberal or the classical liberal would sort of say that, no, I am putting forward the doctrine of the good life. But it seems to me that the classical liberal is saying that we should have some rights. We should have liberalism as a guarantor of sort of legal framework within which we can coexist. But then individuals themselves will have to think about their own view of the moral life, and it is civil society that is going to be the main actor in.
So the the comprehensive liberal, the Rousseauian liberal, can say, well, no, actually, because you start on a certain set of premises, and from these premises, you are unwilling to draw the correct and logical conclusions, which is why I've arrived at the Rousseauian position, and you're on the Lockean position. And that actually, because I mean, Locke, honestly, I think you could charge Locke with hypocrisy, actually. He definitely straddles the boundary between sort of a conservative traditional view and the liberal view, and clearly doesn't want to go full spectrum liberalism. And so the hypocrisy is in holding the assumptions that underpin liberalism, but not actually letting those bloom into what they should or logically would become under the Rousseauian framework. And that's the charge of hypocrisy. And so to say, oh, I'm a liberal, but I'm going to permit all this liberalism because I'm not really going to be a liberal, is what the Rousseauian will charge hypocrisy on. And honestly, I don't think they're wrong there, right? And that's why I'm like, okay, well, I just don't want what they want, so I'm going to have to. But another thing as well, right? Okay, so if we just want a legal doctrine that guarantees certain rights, well, we have that without being liberals, right? We had that as the rights of Englishmen before liberalism was a thing, and so why can we not adopt a different perspective on the world and just drop the word liberalism? Even that liberalism doesn't have a sole claim to rights and freedoms and legal protections and things like that. It doesn't have the sole claim to that. And even if it did, we could still make a new doctrine that had a claim to these things as a core part of its own belief system.
I do see the point. My answer would be, however good that would be, is that there is immense power in symbolism, and I think that the symbol of liberty should not be given away to Rousseauians and aspiring bureaucrats, paternalists and tyrants.
But I don't think they have the sole monopoly on the concept of liberty. I don't think liberalism has the sole concept, monopoly on the concept of liberty.
No, I agree with this. And I think that it would be a good idea if now we mentioned some notions of liberty to put forward, so we sort of structure, because...
Sorry, I realize I derailed this very quickly.
No. I mean, it's a freestyle symposium. That's... Well, it's really nice, but I think that it's. I agree with you. There is liberalism. Classical liberalism does not have the monopoly on the idea of liberty. Now, the way I see it, liberalism is, broadly speaking, a kind of tradition that says that liberty is a supreme political value, and there are many ways in which we could distinguish kinds of liberty and liberalism if we ask two questions. At least. There are more, but let's keep it simple. One question is, when we say that liberty is supposed to be a supreme moral value, there's a big question. Is it supposed to be the only supreme moral political value, or is it one among many? If we accept the first position, which would be a bit more, you could say, hardline position and a bit more ideological, we have the sort of monistic liberal, classical liberal. If we accept the latter position, that liberty is a supreme moral, a supreme political value, but it is one among many others, we become what Isaiah Berlin would call a value pluralist classical liberal, or value pluralist liberal. And there's these are two distinctions. And there's another thing to be asked, is that it comes exactly from the question you asked. What is liberty?
So I think that there isn't a version of liberalism that actually only believes in liberty, because baked into the prior assumptions of liberalism is smuggled in the concept of equality and sameness and universality and interchangeability. And so the concept of equality is also a core part of liberalism. And of course, this is a contradictive dichotomy that liberty and equality have. If we're all free, we can't be equal. If we're all equal, we can't be free. But it does.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.